you for joining us. I see that a few of you are hopping on, and we're going to give maybe a few minutes for everyone to join because it's almost 40 of you signed up today, so that's great. I will introduce our speakers, but just for a few minutes while we wait, I will be sharing my screen with you and reminding you of what this session is all about. So as you know, if you've joined on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday this week, we're doing these webinar sessions as part of the Biosocial Scotland Bootcamp. So we are trying to look at how we can help social enterprises to, sort of bolster their efforts when it comes to communications and marketing, especially in the lead up to Christmas. And so there's 8 sessions in total. You can pick and mix. It's completely free to join. And then we have a great range of expert speakers who are there to share with us their insights and practical tips. So hopefully you'll find the session today interesting. So today we're talking about PR, media, influencer relationships. How can you kind of, target the right people to talk to, how to approach them, how can you tell them about your news story, your product, your service, what's going on in a way that, ensures that the relationship is mutually beneficial. You're not just bombarding people with the wrong things, or you're not just approaching the wrong people, and you're doing it at the right time as well. And then the idea, of course, is to get coverage for you, positive coverage, so that, more people are finding out about your brand and, falling in love with what you offer. So a last note before we start, let me tell you a little bit about our speakers. So we have Simon Francis. He's worked in PR, comms, marketing for like 20 years. So he's one of the co-founders of Campaign Collective. He'll tell you a bit more about Campaign Collective in his slides, but basically they are a social enterprise themselves. So that's pretty cool. And they operate like a communications agency, offering consultancy, marketing. They launch a lot of campaigns, and a lot of high profile clients work with them. So someone good to talk to if you're looking for that kind of help, whether you're a charity, you're a social enterprise, or you're a third sector organization, that sort of thing. So yeah, Simon is, knows everything about PR and media, so he's the good person to talk to. And then we also have Sabrina Nordlund today with us. So she's a Canadian expat and has been in Edinburgh for a while. She is a content writer, a photographer, an influencer. She has a blog and social media pages where she has like an online audience. And so she creates content for them with her own kind of editorial approach, but she also works with independent brands. So, interesting small brands that have a good fit with her audience, that, sort of have the kind of products and services that she wants to showcase and that she feels will, look authentic to her fans and followers. So she's also a freelancer. So if you're interested in kind of a little bit of help with copy or marketing strategy or even an influencer campaign, then you can look at her website and chat to her. So a final note before we start. If you are a social enterprise that has a product, service, or experience that's a good fit for like an ethical gift this Christmas, then I would love to chat to you. We are working on a campaign that is going to feature and showcase some of you. So, get in touch with me, and I would love to chat about what we can do together. And then if you've attended the bootcamp this week, we've had 5 sessions this week. Next week, we're taking a breather, much needed, I think, because we shared lots of interesting content this last week. So next week, we'll be putting the webinar recordings online. And we'll also have some handy PDFs you can download. So there'll be a recap of the best practices that were shared. And we'll also have like lots of interesting links so that if you want to kind of go further with the lessons that were shared with us from the speakers, then you can do that. Okay, I think that's enough of me talking. Let me stop my screen sharing, and then I will let Simon take it away first so we can talk about the press and media in particular. Remember that with every other session, we have that chat box running. So if you have any questions, if you have interesting comments, if Simon says something and you're like, oh my God, this is one of the worst challenges I'm facing right now, please say something in the chat box, and then I'll make sure that we ask that in the Q&A. Voila, there you go, Simon. Thank you for joining us.
Cool, thank you. Can you see my screen? Is the first
Yes, I can see.
Great, perfect. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for joining. It's great to see so many people on a Friday afternoon. We were just commenting earlier that we would normally be perhaps in the pub at this time, but we can't. So what better thing to do on a Friday afternoon instead than learn about engaging with media and influencers. So I won't say too much more about who Campaign Collective is, because Jessie did such a good job that I think I should just sort of leave it at that, really. But yeah, so just also this year, I'm the chair of the Public Relations and Communications Association Council, and we've been doing a lot of work in trying to encourage more business-to-business supplying into the PR sector, which I know Social Enterprise Scotland has helped us get the word out about that. So yeah, so you've heard about who Campaign Collective is and who I am. A couple of other things to say is, so yeah, we're a marketing agency that helps people with their communications, from media training, from political and stakeholder engagement, through to filming, print production, social media, grassroots activity as well. But I suppose the kind of important thing is what we do with our profits and what is our social purpose. So we've helped develop an industry definition of what social impact for PR and marketing agencies should be. And we measure ourselves against that, look at how many, what we contribute towards the UN's SDGs. But we also try and help not only smaller campaigners and grassroots organisations, but also inspire the next generation of campaigners. So a couple of things that might be of relevance. We are a few years out from the next general election in the UK. Kind of some of the work we did around the Lobbying Act is slightly less relevant, but if you ever have questions about what you can and can't do during a general election campaign, then there's a guide on our website that we produced for free, so worth bearing that in mind. Probably of most relevance to everyone today is what we've been doing the last couple of years, which is to use our profits to support a new media platform to actually get more positive news stories out there about charities, social enterprises and campaigners, and that's called The Rooftop. We launched 2 years ago, and we now have around 500,000 content views a week across all of our channels. So if you have any positive news about your social enterprise, then we'd love to hear from you, and I'll put contact details up at the end. Kind of three main things I thought before we get into kind of like Q&A, and happy to take kind of any questions that you may have about engaging with the media. I thought I might just give a very quick overview of engaging with the media, some basic hints and tips about what to do. And I've sort of started this from a kind of assuming kind of very little knowledge. So some of you may know some of this, others this might be all completely new, but try and get everyone to kind of at least some level of knowledge before we get into the Q&A. So cover who to contact, what to say, and when to contact people. So first of all, who to contact? Well, the good news is that there's absolutely hundreds, thousands of media outlets that are potentially willing to hear from social enterprises and wanting to hear about the work that you're doing. Broadly, we can break this into 5 kind of groups: international and national media, regional and local media, hyper-local and community media, and that might be a community of interest as well as a community based in space. Sector media, and by that I mean both the sector in which we operate, so essential social enterprise sector, so your likes of Pioneers Post and Third Force News and that sort of publication, but also in your vertical sector. It could be kind of the environment, or it could be education, or it could be kind of other kind of sectors that you operate in. So there's that media as well. And then finally, there's kind of consumer media, and that its kind of broadest stretches from kind of your what would have been called the weekly glossy magazines that you used to get through, and still do get to a certain extent, through to kind of now this would incorporate a lot of online influencers such as Sabrina and her colleagues we would see fitting into that kind of more consumer side of things. Then for each of those, they then have online, broadcast, social and offline versions, and some may only have online, some may only have social if you're an influencer like Sabrina, some might just be broadcast if you think about the BBC. although BBC is obviously broadcast and online, but generally speaking, there'll be a mix of some of those different channels that they are getting the news and content out to the general public. So that's obviously a lot of media to think about, and I think the biggest challenge, I know this has been covered in kind of sessions earlier in the week, or will be covered in sessions in a couple of weeks' time, is who are you talking to? Who is your audience? Who do you want to get across to? And when you've identified them, then you can start to think about what is the best media channel that there possibly is in order to reach them. So once you've kind of thought about that, then you can start thinking about which media to go to. And when you've got the list of the media that you would want to go to because you think that they are your audience is reading that media, then you can start thinking about who at that media outlet to contact. The good news is that so much of content is now online and is easy to search. So if you want to find out who the best person to talk to about reducing the use of single-use plastics is at the Herald, then you go to the Herald's website and you type in plastics and you see who's written about it. It's as simple as that. It's a time-consuming thing, but anyone can do it. On regional and local media, you will know what your media is local to you, and you'll probably know just by reading the article who the byline is, who tends to cover your area or tends to cover your issues. It's, as I say, it's not rocket science. I think as you get down into kind of away from online, and print, it does become a little bit more difficult to find out who's behind things. So if you were trying to engage with some hyper-local media, trying to find out who the admin of the I Love Leith page is on Facebook is slightly more tricky, but again, can be done with some digging. With broadcast media, and I'll come on to talk a bit more about broadcast media, that is the most challenging, because a lot of the people who actually are producing the news are not the people who you see. So the people who you might need to talk to are never going to be in front of camera. Then their names aren't on the internet as easily to find. So that is certainly something that you need to kind of think about. If you want to sort of talk to broadcast media, then that's something that I'll come on to. In terms of the best way of contacting people, well, there is finding out what their email address is, and most emails can be relatively easy to guess, especially when it comes to journalists online and print. But probably the more effective way, especially for smaller organisations wanting to engage the media directly, is through Twitter. And actually reaching out to people on their Twitter channels, asking them about your service and the stories that they're talking about. And that engagement doesn't have to be just done straight, kind of because you want something from them. You can identify who the journalist is and just follow them on Twitter, engage them, retweet them. They'll notice that over time, and Sabrina will say a lot more about this with far more authority than I will, but they will notice this over time, and then when you then need them for something, they may well recognise you, or recognise your name anyway. So that's kind of about how you would go about finding out. I mean, obviously, if you want to do a much bigger push, then that's where kind of getting a hold of media databases becomes important, and that's obviously something where you might start thinking about hiring an agency like ourselves or a freelancer to help you, because they will probably have access to the bigger media databases that tell you who all the editors are, who you don't see, and the researchers are, who are sort of the people who are fronting things to camera. So next up is what. So you've identified who you're going to talk to. You then need to think about what it is that you're going to send to them. And while we don't really deal with like press as a kind of thing anymore so much, we deal with media. The press release is still probably the easiest way of getting everything that you need into one place that you can send to the media. But I'd probably advise you to think of it less as a press release and more as a news article. I still kind of, if I'm going to write something, I'd still look at what is the media that I'm trying to reach. I'd get a copy of their paper or get the website in front of me. I'd read a couple of articles, refresh my memory about how it is that their house style is at the moment, and try and imitate it. Write about what you are doing, but in the style of the article that you see in front of you. And that's something that, kind of PRs get taught right at the start, and is still something that kind of we do every kind of day almost, to make sure that what we're saying is said in the best way. I'll come on to say a bit more about content for that news article or press release, but also think about images. This is now probably as important now as the words. For the rooftop, we don't cover stories that don't have an image that come with them. And we don't, and news desks in general have very little time to start finding images. So if you want your story to land and to have a higher profile, you'll want to make sure you've got an image to go with it. Make sure it's an image that you have copyright and you have the rights to share. Don't just go and take something off Google. You probably are breaching copyright if you do that. Make sure you've either use Shutterstock, one of the other many kind of stock image libraries that you can use, or even better, commission your own photographer to take some images for you. There's databases, of freelance photographers all over Scotland that you can use that would happily help you, and they will obviously need paying, but the images they take you can use time and time again. Think about potentially film content, especially if you're going to broadcast, and especially at the moment, film crews can't get out to film things that are happening. You may well just be doing an interview over Skype or Zoom, and if you're doing that and you have film content about your social enterprise that you can give them, they may well cut that into the story, and that's something that we would generally have as well as part of the things that we can offer to broadcast. But it doesn't all have to be about you and what your story is. It can also just be about comment and opinion about what is happening, and certainly that's a good way of building relationships with journalists, is being the person who they can go to for sharp, insightful comment on the issues that you are an expert on. So just a bit more about what to say in a press release or a news article. And the single most important thing is kind of almost, what is the news hook? Why should somebody write about this now? Why didn't they write about it yesterday? Why shouldn't they write about it tomorrow? Why is it that you want them to write about your story right now? What's the news hook? What's the calendar hook? Don't forget to include what your social enterprise does. Probably also handy to have an explanation of what a social enterprise is up your sleeve, because that is still something that the media struggle to get sometimes. Why did you found your social enterprise? What's the story behind it? Who will it benefit? And then how can people help? What's the call to action? And if you include all of those things in your news article, don't forget to hyperlink back to your own site. The more, as I said, going back to the point about how you write this, the more similar it is to a news article that the journalist might feature on their own site, the more likely it is they're going to just cut and paste it. And when they cut and paste it, they cut and paste your hyperlinks with it. And then you're helping your SEO as well as delivering your kind of message to a wider audience. So there are some key tips on what to include in your press release. When to reach the media. When is probably the thing that me and my colleagues spend the largest amount of time talking about. You need to balance when you need something to land, and sometimes you won't have a choice. That could be an event, it could be a protest, it could be something that you have to talk about at a certain time because you've got various pressures that means that has to happen. But trying to strike the balance between avoiding a busy news period, but also having yourself available to do interviews is kind of absolutely crucial. Sometimes you won't know what's going on. Other times you can. I mean, today is a busy news day because of, every day is a busy news day because of the coronavirus, but at the moment, it's especially busy news day because of the Tears announcement. Keep an eye on what's happening in the world. Don't try and compete with something that you're never going to be able to get a look in for. In terms of when you go out to the news desks, generally speaking, the earlier the better. And that's not just in terms of the day itself, but also try to speak to journalists before your story hits. Don't go to them and say, right, I want you to write about this on today, because they've already decided what they're writing about today a day ago. And in some cases, with some of the consumer titles, they'll have thought about what they're going to be writing about today, kind of months in advance. A lot of the Christmas gift guides for the consumer titles will already be sewn up. there'll be limited opportunity to get in there. With the nationals, they're just starting to think about them now. But so this is how far out sometimes people are working, and sometimes and you need to kind of bear that in mind. But also think about, if you are doing something in advance, then you can think about using an embargo. And most of the stories that we have out will have an embargo on them. And this means that you embargo something to the day that you want it to appear. Generally, you put 0001 on the day that you want it to appear. And that means that you can send it out to the media in advance of that day, but they won't publish anything until that day. I've never had an embargo breached. It is an unwritten rule that kind of people don't do that, because if they do, they don't get stories again in advance in the future. And journalists rely on people sending them stories as much as they do on people reading them from the consumers. So they know that is something that is acceptable. Obviously, don't go out with something that is embargoed, weeks and weeks and weeks into the future. But certainly, if we were having a story out next week, it would have probably already gone to the media under embargo. And especially, this is important when it comes to broadcast. Broadcast planning desks don't tend to make decisions until 2 p.m. the day before. They don't tend to get into work until lunchtime the day before, the breakfast shows certainly, and the news, kind of the general news headlines. So in order for you to speak to the producers on a particular show, you need to have spoken to them 2-3 days before, so that they've got it in their diary, so then they can make their decisions. So that's where especially embargoes are really useful when it comes to broadcasts. Increasingly now, we'll use exclusives as well, especially if we want a story to stand out, and especially if you're thinking of launching, you've got one shot at this. So think about potentially identifying the absolute key piece of media that you want to achieve, and offer it to them as an exclusive. And that again will help you secure a really big piece of coverage. So apologies, that's a real canter through, as Jessie mentioned. That's about 20 years of experience condensed into less than 20, well, about 20 minutes. Sorry, I ran on a bit there. But hopefully people have found that useful. My contact details are down on the left-hand side there. Please feel free to contact me by email, connect with me on Twitter. If you do have a story already that you want the rooftop to cover, then the email address for the editor address is there. So please feel free to send stuff to that address too. And I'm sure Jessie will send this and the slides around to everyone afterwards, so you don't have to scribble it all down now.
Thank you, Simon. That was super helpful, and especially, when you said that photos are so important, I was like, yes, yes, it's so important. As someone who creates content about social enterprises as well, it is sometimes super hard to find good pictures, and a lot of the social enterprise will have them. It's just that they didn't make them available on their website or on their social pages. So I think this is a good tip for everyone. Think about having that folder, of having a few images in there that you can make available when you send a press release, that you can put on your blog. And we said yesterday in the session about the website traffic to name them correctly. So that's a really good tip. I have a couple of questions for you, Simon. Maybe Naomi will have some, maybe Sabrina will have some. Hearing you, Simon, I am thinking that actually to build a relationship with the press and media, it is not just like an email relationship, which I think a lot of us think it's as simple as that, as sending an email or sending a press release. But when you were talking, I could tell that you were it sounded like it was also a phone relationship, actually talking to people maybe. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that has been, it has evolved from kind of back in the day, kind of actually meeting up with journalists and knowing them was kind of important. That obviously now is definitely less important. And phone has definitely decreased. Obviously, the majority of news desks are working from home. So actually the chances of you being able to get through to anyone are pretty slim. However, the good thing is that when you do get to know someone, or they get a reply from someone on email, they will generally put their mobile number on there now, which is something they never used to do. They used to hide behind the office answering machine or switchboards. So that is definitely a case of building that relationship. And it's not just phone and email, but also on social media as well. And sometimes it's about helping them out. We do a bit of work with care homes And there's a lot that we have to say about the state of social care, and not all of it is stuff that we can say to the media, and we would not want to be quoted on. So we will say, we think perhaps these are the questions you should be asking. We don't want to go on record to say this, but these are the questions you should be asking. I will caveat that with, obviously, if you are speaking to a journalist, there is actually really no such thing as off the record. So kind of, it's a dangerous game to play. Sometimes you have to really trust the journalist. You have to really kind of have a relationship with them. But certainly, you know, kind of, if take it to social media, you know, interacting with them, telling them what you think about the issues that they're writing about, the stories that they're reporting on, you know, it will get you noticed. And obviously doing it in a constructive way and an informed way is definitely a really important part of building that relationship. So, you know, just as long as you're aware, but, you know, if you're doing it on social media, then everything you say is public anyway. So, you know, kind of just sort of, you know, before you lay in too hard into the government about any particular issue, you might just want to kind of remember that it might come back to bite you. But yeah, you're right. Building that relationship is not just about kind of sending an email saying, hey, we've got this new story that we want you to cover.
Yeah.
It was interesting, Simon, you talked about relationships, because again, I know in work I've done in the past, one of the other things is, much as we can sometimes leave it to the last minute to publish an article or try and get a press release, sometimes on the other end of the kind of news desk, so to speak, they'll suddenly have articles or space that they need to fill at the last minute because maybe priorities have changed. And sometimes we used to, just by having those good relationships with people, you would occasionally, if they know you and they know you'll react quick, they would pick up the phone and go, I've suddenly got space for a third of a page article in this week, so and so. Can you come up with something? And the answer is always yes, generally speaking, in my experience, because if you put yourself then in that position where you're helping them at the point when they've got space to fill, then when they do see stuff go in from you, they recognize your name and they'll almost try to help you back out. So it's definitely a two-way thing in my experience.
Yeah, and that's where kind of, you know, working with people on exclusives and kind of, you know, helping them fill their pages or fill their online content. And I think, you know, now certainly, you know, kind of, you do see, I mean, journalists I definitely recommend people following on Twitter is Ian Pope from Edinburgh Evening News and Scotsman. He's really open and upfront about the fact that kind of, you know, he's editing today, please send me your stories. Or we're kind of, you know, looking, he never quite admits we're looking really light on content for today, but, you know, you follow him enough and you can tell that he's basically saying, we've got nothing. Can people please send us stuff? And that you know, yeah, absolutely, following people like that kind of will help you in terms of understanding what's coming up and what can come up.
That's a good tip. A practical question as well. Should you contact a journalist like first without an ask at all? So obviously, you know, you've given several examples of, you know, sending a press release maybe about news that you have, or maybe it's an exclusive interview, or maybe, you know, it's like a big campaign or initiative you're launching. Should you think about, you know, once you've identified, as you recommended, the sources and the specific people that you should be talking to, would you, like, when you have done this list, would you contact them the first time to say, this is who we are, this is what we do, whatever, I'd love to be in touch and pitch stories to you? Like, this sounds like a newbie question, but I will own up to it.
No, it's an interesting point, actually, because I mean, you know, yeah, back in, you know, sorry, I keep saying back in the day, you know, kind of like last year.
Showing your age, Simon.
It's just at the end of the week. I'm feeling like, I feel like Monday was back in the day, to be perfectly honest, this week. Yeah, so for social enterprise, what I suggest though is you will have things that journalists want over and above the news about whatever it is that you're doing. And generally that will probably be access to the beneficiaries that you're working with. So who are the people that you're helping? Now, if you've got case studies and you have access to, you know, if you work in kind of, you know, if you're running a cafe in a deprived part of Glasgow, then you've got access to people who are on the front line of the decisions that policymakers are making left, right, and centre, and you might be able to facilitate that. So if you've got kind of, you know, if your board has got, you know, some really good spokespeople about business issues from BME backgrounds, that again is something that journalists are looking for. So think about kind of the spokespeople that you've got, the case studies that you've got, who might be willing to speak to the media, and perhaps then, yeah, drop a line to a journalist saying, like, if you're ever writing about these issues, we've got people with lived experience here who can help with that, and we've got experts that can help you with comment on these issues. So certainly that would be definitely a case of kind of, you know, going with that and reaching out to them first. Yeah, absolutely.
Another quick question. So if you are a social enterprise that maybe sells a product like gin or socks or, you know, a hamper gift box or something, obviously you can still work on these kind of more opinion pieces or comment, but maybe you are more trying to place your product along specific key timings of the year, like Valentine's and Mother's Day and Christmas. So what is the kind of timeline that they look at, or do you have general tips for them?
Yeah, it's the best thing is to look, well, first of all, to find out what sort of stuff is making, is probably to look back at last year, or, you know, kind of if it hasn't come up yet this year. So, you know, kind of, yeah, what did those media outlets do last year? And then kind of think about kind of, you know, well, they'll probably be doing something similar. Most people just sort of copy and paste and then update. You know, kind of, what did we do last year? How do we make it better? So that, I suppose, is the key, is look at what they did last year and then think about, well, how can we help them make it better? And then sort of think about kind of, well, depending on who it is, think about the deadlines, as I say, with, you know, any of these fixed dates. If you're talking about kind of the consumer media, probably are looking about 6 to 8 weeks out for big events like Christmas. They'll start their planning cycles, you know, kind of, I mean, there's a thing in the industry, it's Christmas in July. I mean, it's fashion thing. I think it came from fashion.
I'm sure Sabrina gets a lot of those press releases in the summer about the Christmas collections.
But yeah, obviously though, I mean, it's interesting that, I mean, it'd be interesting, Sabrina, what your take is on this, but I kind of get the impression that that's how it all used to be. So the PR industry is built around the fact that you've got to do Christmas in July and get everything ready for that. However, with the rise in kind of influencers, you're not really thinking about, you're thinking about more immediate terms. So kind of, it is now, if you're doing a Christmas gift campaign, the time that you're spending on that is going to go from July through to, you know, the 24th of December, basically.
Yeah, that's really helpful. That's great. Okay, thank you so much, Simon. And I'm sure we'll have a few more questions at the end. But maybe I'll bring in Sabrina, and then we can talk to you guys a little bit more about influencers and content creators. I'm sure some of you follow people on Instagram, on Facebook, even on YouTube, or sometimes you land on that type of content because you're doing a Google search, and there's actually a lot of valuable content out there that is made by influencers because they write in a way that they just think about what consumer audiences are interested in. So yeah, let's have Sabrina come in and then she can tell us a bit more about her work.
Hi, I'm Sabrina. All of a sudden there's construction outside of my house, so I apologize if you can hear that. Just
we can't hear it, don't worry. No, it's fine.
So I'm Canadian and I moved to Scotland about 2 years ago, and I've been blogging, Instagramming and what have you pretty much since Instagram existed and since WordPress was popular, because that sort of happened as I was coming of age, so it was all very new and exciting. And I started, and I got my first job in marketing because of that, because I sort of self-taught myself how to social media manage and how to run a WordPress website and do SEO and do all of those things. And so while I've studied history, and I continue to study history, I also have my foot in the other pond of digital marketing. So I moved here to Scotland. Again, I started working at a marketing agency here, actually in direct mail. So got hands in both online and offline campaigns. And then I stopped working there, and I hoped to freelance or work on a bigger marketing team, and then coronavirus hit, so I started freelancing and I got to go back to school, and I'm working on my master's thesis in history remotely at a Canadian university while freelancing. And throughout all of that, I have continued to produce content online. So there's a lot of influencers like me, who some people will call us influencers and some people won't. I mean, if you look at my Instagram, I have only just over 3,000 followers. It doesn't seem like a lot. And that's what people call micro-influencers. So while I have a day job and I'm busy with other things during my day, I still produce content, and that content is valuable because it's very trusted by the average consumer. So more and more brands are looking to either mix, whether they're using big influencers or small influencers, and most small businesses will focus more on small micro influencers like me, because we tend to be more locally based, tend to be more involved, and get to know people on more of a personal level. So that's a bit about me.
That's good to know. I'm just going to jump in and say, actually, I think you're really great. And I can see a lot of influencers doing this. But when you say like getting to know people on a personal level, I'm like, yes, because basically everyone, if on Instagram, Sabrina is writing about like slow travel to a specific destination in Scotland, then people will comment and say, oh, this is great, or oh, I have a question about this place. So you will see influencers actually reply to comments, reply to direct messages, share additional content, send a link to a blog post where they recap things. So that's why it's really good to work with them, because if they include you in their content, then as Simon said, for the press and media, you will have maybe a link there on their website that links to yours and helps with your authority. But it also just, people trust your recommendations. They follow you in the first place for that.
Yeah, I think that's something people forget a lot about the influencer industry, is like, it's more than just you've paid them 50, 100, 150 pounds to post something on their grid. I think out of the influencer campaigns I've done this year, I've only posted 1 or 2 grid photos. The rest of them, I did recently a photo shoot with the tartan blanket company. I didn't really post anything about it, but they'll have all of that content to put on their website. I did a slow travel blog for them on their website when I went to Tallinn. So there's a lot of ways to work with influencers that are beyond just let's post one photo, and there are ways that you can sort of stretch that content and copy it onto your website and have that photography for when you're doing a press release. Something.
Yes. Yes, work with influencers, get good quality content that you can reuse. So how do brands approach you, Sabrina, if they want you to write about them, or even just if they want to be on your radar? What kind of, outreach do you get?
There are usually 2 ways I will get contacted. The main way is through my email, because across all the platforms that I'm on, so I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on TikTok now, and I'm on YouTube. So all of those, the best way to contact me is usually through email. It's like the common denominator. So I will get emails, but I do also sometimes get direct messages, which usually in that case it's more of a conversation being started. So if I've mentioned your brand, you then say, oh, thanks for mentioning us, we'd love to work with you sometime, what's your email? And then it goes to an email conversation. So it usually ends up in email, because of course once you start working with someone, you need to send over briefs and you need to send over a lot more detail, and it's just much easier to work through email.
So that's interesting. So sometimes a brand might contact you to be on your radar, and will they send you a press release, or as you just said now, sometimes they'll send you a specific brief, like this is the campaign we're doing, let's say this jean collection for Christmas, can you talk about it, and are you interested? Is that sort of thing?
Yeah, it varies. You'd be surprised at some of the things that I get. So for some of them, I will get completely organized. Somebody's put together a brief that has exactly what they want me to post about. It won't be like exact copy, but it'll have hashtags and this and that, exactly what the intention is, posting dates. They'll have a sign up link as well, where I just put in all my information so they can send me that product. My PayPal, everything is just done online. And other times it's completely different, where it's a lot more back and forth. We're discussing what we want to do. I send you an invoice, and it's that sort of thing. So there's a lot of variety, and it tends to be the very big companies will know exactly what they want to do beforehand.
Or maybe they work with someone like Simon, and then he tells the company, you have to send this. And obviously, Sabrina, because you have your marketer hat as well, I'm sure you look at things the way not just an influencer and content creator does, but a marketer does. So, if you were a small brand or a social enterprise or a charity, how would you kind of know which influencers to pick? This is a question from Marta, who says, how to find the right influencers for you, how to find influencers if, I am a social enterprise, maybe I have an environmental cause or a social cause. What do you advise?
It always, I think, comes back to networking and marketing, no matter what you're doing. So it's important for you to pick the right influencer. So if you're not on Instagram, it might not be for you to have an Instagram campaign. And if you are on Instagram, you should be checking out the hashtags that are related to your topic, and you should be finding people that way. The other thing you can do if you're completely new to everything and trying to create some sort of strategy is talk to a freelancer. I mean, you can do these things alone, but most of the freelancers I know generally also have blogs or Instagram or something, and they'll know the landscape. I mean, I know most of the people who are influencers in Edinburgh who are more sustainable fashion influencers, who talk about the environment, who talk about mental health, and a variety of things, just because I meet them at events and so on. So that's really helpful. Another good thing to do, you know, we were talking a lot about gifting campaigns, and of course that's something bloggers do all the time. They love to have gift guides. I have gift guides from last year for Edinburgh and Scotland and so on, and you'll find them on Twitter most often because there's the PR request and journal request. So if you look up those hashtags around this time of the year, any time between now and, like you said, Simon, December 24th, you will find bloggers on there who are asking for, what should I tell people to gift this year? Do you have something that you've got on? And they will love that you are a small enterprise, because they love any sort of selling point, and that's a massive selling point for them, rather than telling people to just continue consuming, which is now a huge criticism in the influencer industry, is that it's supporting fast fashion and all these bad things for the environment. They'll love that they have the opportunity to say, this is something you can feel really good about buying.
Yeah, that's a good tip, and I completely agree. I feel like a lot of the influencers that I'm following are posting more content that is sort of shop small, shop independent, shop local. So probably everyone, this is a good year to, you know, look at that in particular. And so Sabrina, I also wanted to ask you in terms of the type of collaborations that you can do. So you've mentioned events before. So sometimes, obviously this year it's complicated, but in a normal year, this is one of the things that you can do if you want to work with an influencer. You can say, hey, we have maybe this tasting event, or we have like this charity run or whatever. You also mentioned product gifting. So maybe someone would send you a product and you would consider writing about it for free. Or it can be, I heard you mention as well, photography. Maybe you won't write the content, but someone will send you something and you'll do a series of photographs. What are kind of other things that can exist, like giveaways or paid sponsored posts? What kind of things do you do?
Yeah, it totally depends on the situation that you're in, and whoever has come towards you usually will have an idea whether they want to have a big campaign where they're gifting people. For example, recently, jewelry was all over Edinburgh. This one jewelry brand has clearly emailed all the influencers in Edinburgh and said, well, send you jewelry for free as long as you post once on your grid about it. So that's one side of things. You can also then have the paid collaboration, and that can be anywhere from one grid post to a series of grid posts to now there are reels on Instagram, which is a video, usually TikTok-like. It's usually about 10 seconds to 30 seconds long, and that then would probably cost a bit more money. You can have any combination thereof. And there are also stories on Instagram, which is 24 hours long, and loads of people watch them. So you'll have, usually if somebody's asking me to post on my grid, that also asking me to post on my story, because it just ups engagement, and it's usually a bit cheaper and not as intense, I suppose, as a grid post, which you would have to usually, if you're asking someone for a grid post, send them to you, the pictures and the captions and everything for you to approve, because you don't want somebody posting something that isn't true, or maybe they've missed the mark a little bit from the brief. So you do have that sort of authority, especially when you're paying someone, to say this isn't actually what we asked for.
That's really interesting. So there definitely is an element of like collaborative briefing, and then doing the content and then sending it if it's like a paid collaboration. That will be, I think, interesting to hear for some brands. What about questions around disclosure? Because obviously I've seen, you know, you in particular, but also other more ethical influencers, you know, are really clear in terms of like what type of collaboration they're working on. So can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah. So with anything, when you're working with a brand and it is an advertisement, you need to make that clear. Legally, you need to make that clear in the UK. So even if somebody's gifted me something, I need to make sure that people know that that's not something I paid for. So even if I was wearing something today that was gifted, I think these earrings are gifted. So if I was to take a selfie right now and put it on my Instagram, I need to say that that was gifted, even though it was gifted to me ages ago. It always needs to be clear that that was intended to be an advertisement. Then if you're doing an advertisement where you have paid them and you've sent over a brief and you've gone back and forth, that needs to be marked as an ad or advertisement, some sort of disclaimer. It needs to be at the beginning of the caption. Sometimes influencers like to hide it at the end. You won't notice. And I do think, I mean, sometimes it puts people off to know that you have to disclose, and they're like, oh, well, they're just going to scroll right past it. And I think that's where it becomes very important that you're working with influencers that relate to what you're talking about, and that it'll just sort of flow seamlessly within their content, and people aren't going to be like, why are they doing an ad about that? They never talk about that. So it's good in that way to have that sort of ad release, because it does help you weed out the people where you're like, that's not what you post about usually. But it is something then on the marketing side, you sometimes see the marketing teams have not thought about it, or they've hired an agency that's just gone for the cheapest option.
That's good to know. Marta is asking, Kate is asking, what is a grid post? So it's the square, that square that you have on Instagram.
Yeah, so that's just on Instagram. Just like a main feed post that will come up on someone's homepage.
What I found interesting about what you said, Sabrina, is, when you said like it could be stories, it could be a square post, it could be a video, it could be a series of photos. So this is a bit of a tricky question. I hope you're not uncomfortable answering this, but let's say that we have a small independent brand who comes to you as a freelance marketer and says, okay, I want to work with influencers. I'm okay with working maybe with smaller ones because I'm just starting out. What would you recommend them, in terms of like maybe small budget to test the waters? And are there specific formats like the grid post or stories or YouTube video or a blog article or a mix of those? What would you recommend?
I think it depends on the small enterprise and what it is that they do, whether it's a product or a service. If it's a product, Instagram can be really good for that, because you can ask people to market it, influencers to market it and create that content, repost that then on your page. And also they have a feature where you can sell from within Instagram, and that's a great way of tracking. So that's one example. But I think that's the point where it depends on the small enterprise that's coming to you, because some of them, it would be more relevant for it to be on YouTube, depending on the audience that you're targeting. I mean, different audiences are on different social media platforms. So it's really not a one size fits all. And it depends also what you're already doing. So if you're planning a collaboration because you actually realize your audience is all on Instagram and you're not on Instagram yet, so you're launching yourself on Instagram, that's something that you can plan for and do that, because it would be beneficial for you to be there. But if you're not on Instagram and you don't need to be on Instagram, you don't need to go on Instagram just because there are influencers on there. There are also loads of opportunities on YouTube, on Facebook, and so on.
That's good to know. So in terms of services, like let's say, for instance, a social enterprise maybe offers coaching for students this year who are, not in university, they're at home and their mental health is affected by that. So if you're a social enterprise that doesn't have a tangible product, obviously they might still want to speak to the consumer so what would you, how could they work with influencers in the first place? And if so, would you recommend that they, in the same way they could gift a product, that they have people test the service? What would be your tips?
I think that's somewhere that actually Reels will come into very good use for, because traditionally that sort of service is something that YouTubers would talk about. And it's something you could still do on YouTube if you have an audience for that. But if you wanted to do it on Instagram, I think generally for a service like that, where you're talking about mental health and you're talking about support services, it's something you should be talking about, because it creates that sort of personal connection. So you can post videos on your main feed. You can also post videos on your stories, but they can be longer when they're on Reels. They can be more intuitive. So that's something that you could look into. You could have a variety of influencers talk about their experience with it or why they'd find it beneficial. They can each post that, and then you can take that content, cut it up, and create sort of an advert from that. So there's lots of opportunities on Instagram now that they've introduced Reels as well.
That's a good tip. And I think this is also an area where we are not always aware, because I think, when you think about a blogger and influencer, if you haven't looked into it, you're thinking, okay, so it's a longer form piece of writing on a blog, or it's a photo. But actually what Sabrina's just said is important. A lot of influencers will create on-camera content where they'll be speaking to the camera, they'll be speaking directly to their audience. So Sabrina said they can review a service, they can give a shout out about a service. It could be as simple as like, hey, did you know that, I'm a student myself, and this year is tough for mental health, so I found out that this service exists and you guys should check it out. And then they can point to a link. So that's a good way you can do a campaign.
Yeah, it's interesting actually you point that out, because earlier this year, Lost Stock took us by storm. And when they did that, they emailed all the influencers and got basically everybody to post about it for free, because they were doing it for a reason, for an ethical reason, and they could justify it. And what they did when they emailed all of us was they said, clearly, we don't have a budget for this. We're just starting out, but we'd love it if you'd talk about it. And here are a bunch of Instagram story-sized images that talk about our products, that talk about why it's important, that give you statistics about what's going on. So it basically means the influencer didn't need to actually do any work other than sit in front of the camera phone and say, this is what's happening right now, and this is why I think it's important. Here, check out some statistics. And it means that everybody saw it within a matter of a month or so. It grew exponentially.
That's good to hear. And actually, I think this is a very good example that you picked, because for people who don't know Lost Stock, if I'm not saying something rubbish, so it was this startup here in Scotland who was taking, I guess, lost stock of clothing from some of the factories that had lost their orders from bigger retailers. And then they were sending, you could like purchase basically like a box that you wouldn't know what would be in it, but you'd have 3 to 5 garments. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good example.
It's a set price, and you'd put in like your size and what your preference were. And then it was honestly, people were purchasing it and they didn't get boxes for months, but because it was sort of this purposeful, we're trying to pay garment workers who haven't been paid for their orders, people didn't care really.
Can I also ask you, so if someone contacts a smaller influencer and they want them to test their product or their service, would you recommend like sort of the minimum value? Because obviously I think it's important for small businesses, social enterprises, charities to realize that you can't just ask for something for free. Of course, if there's a good fit in terms of the content that the influencer is writing about, yes, they might be interested, but it's good not to be entitled, I think. And so, it's good to maybe sometimes have that eye on how can it be a mutually beneficial relationship. So what do you kind of recommend to think about?
I think if you're on a strict budget, I think it's just best to be open about that. Because micro influencers in particular, people who don't have a lot of following, they will do gifted things and they will do things for like services, especially when you're a social enterprise. Like they're looking for a reason to help you out in that case. But it's best to just open that dialogue about, we don't have a budget for this. We hope that's okay with you. Would you want to do this on a volunteer basis? Because it allows people to say, well, normally my budget is this, or my base rate for whatever it is you're asking them to do is, I make £10 an hour or something like that. And it would take me 3 hours to do this. So could you please pay me £30? Something like that. Whereas when you just open it up and ask them to do something on a gifted basis alone, there's no conversation about that. And sometimes just the conversation is enough to have someone be like, well, normally my base rate is this, but because you're a social enterprise and I really believe in what you do, I'm totally fine with just doing it this once, just for free, pro bono. And it's a good way to build that trust, I think.
So transparency, really, and sending just a little enough of information that the influencer can see if what you're talking about, your product, your service is interesting, is a good fit for them. Maybe not sending straight up like the whole campaign brief, but kind of, opening a two-way dialogue. That's good to know. Guys, we're almost 5 minutes from 5. So Simon, Naomi, if you guys want to come back in, and everyone, if you have questions for Sabrina and Simon, then now is the time to ask. I think we have 2 good experts today with us, so please don't hesitate.
A quick question, just picking up on the point you made earlier.
Go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, I think my connection's a bit dodgy, but I had just quick questions for Sabrina, just about kind of picking on the point about ethics, because there's also the other way around, where kind of influencers are going to brands and saying, or social enterprise and saying, can you give us stuff? So how do you kind of like deal with obviously I know what I'd say, but I think probably more interesting is kind of like, if you know, how can you say no, or what should you say to sort of not offend the influencer who at the end of the day still has that many followers, yet at the same time get across the point that you're a social enterprise and you don't have kind of, you know, money to kind of spend with them, or kind of free stock to give away, or whatever it is.
I think in the same time, like, transparency is key again. I think it's fair to be brutally honest in that scenario. The same way that, you know, businesses shouldn't expect for people to work for free, influencers shouldn't expect to get stuff for free and to be paid for free. And they might be reaching out because they think, oh, this would be a great collaboration. But equally, I'm very aware, and I would imagine that other influencers are very aware, that when it comes to a social enterprise, there are certain exceptions being made, because you should be believing in what they're doing and going out of your way to support them. So in that case, it sounds like it's just not a good fit. And you can just say that, and it's probably going to be fine for them, because realistically, I think the influencers that send those sorts of emails are sending a lot of those emails to just try to make their monthly income.
I think as well that for having been on the side of the brand, you know, what Sabrina says is true. If you are that brand or that charity, that social enterprise where you're getting an outreach from an influencer, then maybe just look at what they send. If it's something kind of nondescript, as Sabrina said, they send a bunch of emails, maybe that's not such an interesting proposal. But maybe you will genuinely have an influencer who's like, hey, you know, you write children's books and you give some of your profits to animal charities. I'm in love with that. Would you like me to run a giveaway, or would you like me to, you know, produce some content for you? I would need to be paid for it, but this is what you could get. Then that's a much more interesting proposition, and not unlike any kind of business collaboration that someone can pitch to you. I kind of stole a question from the Q&A for that one, guys. Actually, could we talk about giveaways? And I guess that giveaways is an interesting question, both from a press and media point of view and from an influencer point of view. Is this a good way to get your product, especially kind of, you know, get some awareness for your product by running that sort of campaign?
I'll go first if you'd like.
Yeah,
well, I
sure.
have a question because my internet went down again, so you'd need to repeat it for me to answer.
It's okay, Simon. So it was just it was a very long-winded question, sorry, but it was about like running giveaways. Can you run a giveaway with an influencer? So Sabrina's going to give us some tips. And with the press and media, Simon, are there ways to place your product in like this is a competition or this is a giveaway?
Yes. So when running a giveaway with influencers, they're very popular because generally, let's use Instagram again. So you say you post a photo of the product and yourself on your feed, and then the brand will post a photo of the product, and you'll both say there's a giveaway going on. Follow us both, tag a friend, share it on your stories so that it maximizes its reach. And that will ensure that you both gain quite a few followers. And I mean, I think recently Molly May, who's a very big influencer, did a giveaway, not in collaboration with Louis Vuitton, but gave away like £8,000 worth of Louis Vuitton and gained like 100,000 followers. So that was very beneficial to her and very beneficial to Louis Vuitton. But on a much smaller scale, you need to make sure that your audiences match up. So even if you've never worked with that brand before, if you're both targeting the same audience and you both want to build that audience, in that case, it's a good idea for a giveaway. In other cases, you'll just get a bunch of influencers banding together to raise a bunch of money to spend on like Louis Vuitton and just try to gain followers that way. So it's just a matter of thinking of your audience and making sure you're seeming authentic still with this giveaway.
Mm-hmm. That's a good tip.
I think the same principles apply with the wider media as well. It's about kind of, you know, making sure it fits with the title. There is kind of, there's people who, especially in the consumer magazines, there'll be somebody who is in charge of coordinating all the giveaways, but yeah, they will also want to make sure that it fits with their agenda. There'll need to be a balance of the giveaways that they give it. I mean, I think it definitely tends to be more done on the consumer side of things. So I mean, obviously you do see in the nationals these big giveaways, you know, like flights for £1 or things like that. But I think that tends to be delivered more by advertising colleagues rather than sort of something that kind of the PRs get involved with. But yeah, with a consumer thing, again, similar, it's a similar principles. Collaboration is definitely set up, and you do get a lot out of it, and undeniably. But it's quite, I mean, it's certainly it used to be very competitive to get into for the media. There's a lot of people trying to do giveaways, so you've got to think about really making sure it works, and really making sure you've got something that's going to add value, not just to you, but what's going to add value to the media brand. They're only doing it because they want to shift copies of the title or attract more people to their website or their social channels. So similar principles apply.
That's good to know. So the main thing that I'm keeping in mind from what you both said today is be smart about like who your audience is for your product or service, who tailor, whether it's press and media, whether it's influencers, take the time, even if it's a little bit of investment at the beginning, and you can get help for this if you need to, but take the time to pick the right people to work with, to approach them in a way that's like transparent, professional, saying what you're looking for, what you think they could help you with, and then open that dialogue to see if that's the right fit, basically.
And just one more point on that is actually think about, we'd like to help people to do this themselves. We don't want to keep on kind of, going back to the same journalist, the same story over again and again. We will tell you who the media are that we're kind of approaching. We'll give you their contact details. So we'll do it once for you. We'll make the introductions, and then you can go ahead and do it yourself. I mean, that's kind of, that's what we're sort of there for. And I think that's what kind of, when you're approaching, whether that's another freelancer or whoever it is, think about kind of, do you want to keep on having someone do this for you, or do you want to do it yourself, or is there someone in your team who wants to pick it up? If it's the blog writing, I know at Sabrina, or we can do people will be able to do a guide for you so that you can then write more yourselves. Think about kind of, not just about kind of this is a transactional thing. Think about it as a kind of, how do you build your own skills, your own capacity, your team's capacity going forward? And then if you are going to spend some money with people to help you do that, how do you make sure that it's that long-term investment that's going to yield something for you, as you said, Jessie?
Great. Any question you had on in mind, Naomi?
No, I got one comment, and it was just as you were talking about obviously approaching people and going, using the kind of social angle. And I guess just as we've said this on other sessions, just because you're a social enterprise, also don't just assume that means that you'll get free marketing all the time. And I think that's really important to remember. You're operating as a business, as are the people that you're trying to work with. So yes, some people might well say, it's great, you're a social enterprise, I can do that for you, but you've got to start with the assumption that everyone needs to be doing that bit of earning money as well. So I think I always put that with a mark of caution, because it's a bit like, if you're selling a product, having a good product is your starting point, not your social impact. It's the same on marketing. So some people might do it for you, but you can't go in with that as your expectation of everything for free, which is perhaps a tough point to finish on, but I think we have to be really careful of that in our sector.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's true. And there is a lot of competition. This is something that I didn't ask Sabrina specifically about, but as Simon said, for press and media journalists, this is true of influencers too. How many emails do you get, Sabrina, in your inbox every day from brands?
I get a lot more Instagram messages these days.
Okay. Yeah. But I guess this is fair that, if you get 50 offer of collaborations a day, you're going to be picky too, to make sure that it's the right fit and you don't work for free all the time, basically.
Yeah. So as an example for the rooftop, we get, and we're a relatively small news organization. We don't get anywhere near the volume of emails that national or regional media get. But we generally get about 50 press releases and stories a day, and we cover one.
Wow.
So,
that's sobering.
And that scales up. That the Edinburgh Evening News will, if they think about how many stories they cover, they'll probably get 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 emails per story that they cover. So the competition is fierce. So that's going back to the points that I think both of us have been making, is kind of, pick your battles, make sure you've done your research, get it right. Kind of, tailor what you're saying to people to make sure that you've got, kind of one chance at this. Make sure it counts.
That's great. Well, thank you both so much. That was a super interesting session. I certainly learned a lot. So that was great. Thank you both for your time today and sharing your insights and your practical tips. I think this is super valuable for everyone. And thank you everyone who joined the bootcamp this week. It was 5 meaty, busy sessions with lots of interesting content, so we hope you liked it. Remember, next week is the breather week, and then join us for sessions commencing the 2nd of November if you'd like. You can pick and mix from what you're interested in. So we'll have one on using social media effectively. We'll have one on using audio, photo, and videos to tell your stories with lots of interesting tips and interesting platforms that you can use that are really affordable to create content. We'll also be talking about launching a service, a product, or a campaign online, because it's that kind of year where everything we're doing is online. So how do you do that well by yourself? How can you launch something through crowdfunding? That sort of helpful tips. And I am thinking about doing one last session maybe, which will maybe be about social media ads, pay-per-click, AdWords, Instagram sponsored content. So I'll have to see if I find good speakers for that one, but I will let you know by email if we set an additional session. So thank you everyone for joining again.